Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Many new faces I haven't seen here before. I believe you've had some wonderful teachers during this recent month or so, and also Ajahn Brahm's 50th celebration of his ordination. Sadhu, 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 Ajahn Brahm. Ajahn Brahm, I have known, or actually we met probably about 45 years ago when I was on my way to Korea. And I was going to Korea to ordain, and we met in Thailand. I don't recall meeting him, but he said he recalls meeting me, so I realized we met. But I have many memories of working with Ajahn Brahm and traveling with him. We went to a number of conferences in Thailand, in Japan, as part of a team working for the Australian Sangha Association and the Federation of Buddhist Councils. And I can just confirm many stories I've heard too, that he is somebody with enormous compassion and capacity. You know, of the Australian monastic I know, and even other foreign monastic I know, his knowledge and his breadth of heart is very large and very consistent, and also incredibly, what can I say, the word in the sense of him ordaining Bhikshuni, very brave, knowing that that was actually a dangerous position to take. But it was something we discussed before he took upon himself to agree to doing that. And I thought to challenge the Thai tradition, of which he had been a part of for so many years, to do something that he believed was very true in the value of bringing full ordination to Buddhist nuns, will be, you know, in the hearts of enormous gratitude for many, many women as it leads into the future. And as has proved, Dhammasara and the Newbury Nuns Monastery and Santee Forest Monastery and nuns throughout the world have greatly valued from this opportunity and matured into very experienced teachers and very good nuns. In my tradition, it has been part of the tradition, I think, as long as there have been monks. So over 1,000 years there have been bhikkhuni. And I stayed in a temple that had a logbook that went right back till the 10th century, where a queen and all her entourage became nuns and became bhikkhunis. So I do know that in that logbook I saw the names and the accomplishments of many abbesses of living in that temple in Seoul until this day. So I just wanted to thank Ajahn Brahm for his extraordinary life as a bhikkhu for 50 years. So today, in talking about time and how time evolves, you know, in who we are, in who we become, in who we were, and in this very present moment, it's a very, very interesting topic. I mean, beyond just all the science in relation to time, Buddhism has a depth of teaching that is still yet to be fully understood, both in the teachings that the Buddha himself gave, of which he spoke of it in small intervals, you might say, but more in the presence of how we live in this presence, in this moment and how we cultivate the mind in this moment. But I want to talk from a number of perspectives and from a very early experience that maybe I should start there. And I have spoken about this before. When I was about 2, I went on a trip from a little country town in the southwest of West Australia to the ocean. And I know from that age, from the age of 2 or 3, I had a repetitive dream that went till I was a teenager, early teenager, till I was 12. And I always thought it was part of my secret self, my other real self, my true self. As a little child, it was where I was always going home to. But in this dream, and where it reflects in this talk about time, was I crawled. So I was still, probably barely walking, crawled into the water and found I could breathe underwater. I don't know if I had a near drowning experience or what happened then, but in this dream, that's what happened. And as I went into the water, there were a lot of familiar creatures to me, a lot of friendly fish of varying sizes, and they would always take me to my true home, to this castle in the water. And it was always just light, with a booming voice in it. And in this space, and why I'm reflecting on it in this talk, is this space of being immersed, as anyone who goes skin diving or goes into the depths of water know. You're in an embodiment of inclusion, so to speak. You're in a place where you're totally surrounded in a connective way with the fluidity, the movements, the flow, the beings in the water, the nature in the water. But somehow it's, in my mind, it was so real, it became a growing story in the progressive dreams. Of course, the fish became something more elaborate, the castle became more elaborate, the booming voice became louder, the light of the castle was brighter, until one day I woke up in the dream and I never had it again. But it stayed with me. And when I was looking at giving this talk, which actually goes in a different way in some ways, it talks about many things in regard to time and how we have come into this view of coming from a past into the present and into the future. And we have we have created a body of memory about the past that has a reflection in what we're doing now, and we have a dream about the future. We have ideas and ideals about the future path that we want to move into. But somehow there is a disconnection. We can see the flow. We can see what we did yesterday to some degree reflects on us today, but that is not so clear. Because quite often in a few moments, we change direction very radically in our day. We change our thoughts, we change our emotions, we change our experience in what we're experiencing now in a way that centers us in very much an idea that we are something separate from everything that's going on around us. We become this sort of solidified sense of a self who's performing in a separate way, who's living out a life in separation. But in time, and as I will express a little bit more through the great Japanese teacher Dogen, who's written a whole text called Ujio on the being, a time being. He sees it as a being, as a flux of arising in an existence of being in a moment. And there are many factors that bring that into its existence. And Dogen even has a number that he's put on it. It's like a moment in his idea of this time space is 400,000,000 and 99,180 moments. It's such an extraordinary, moments in a day. It's such an extraordinary thing to put a number, but I know in Abhidharma, they have a number for a kalpa, which is a very, very long span of time. And they have, this is a moment is called a kasana in Sanskrit, which is just, it also has a big sort of number factor to it. They say something like it has, in one snap of a finger, one like this, there's 64 moments. So you're starting to look at time in these tiny little increments of experience. And what is that saying? So without going into too much of this sort of detail, what we're saying is many factors of happening, many factors influencing our happening in any one moment are influencing this flow of time. From certain perspectives, there is, we're here, we go back into time in recollection, in memory, we come back into this place, we go forward in time, in, hopes and fears and anticipations, and, we're living out of this illusion that time has some sort of separation, something we can fall back into, we can move into. But actually there is a much more fluid consistency that is believed in Mahayana Buddhism about time. Nagarjuna, the great Indian sage, he said, mind that sees into the flux of arisings and the decaying and recognizing the transient nature of the world is called the way of seeing the mind. So when we're meditating and we can look into the transient nature, we can look in the flux of this nature, which we do through meditation. You start to enter into that capacity to look into exactly what's going on. You can see how the mind is moving. You can see how you're reaching for this and you're rejecting that. But it's also talking about, here he calls it the way-seeking mind. The mind is looking for something. It's creating time in its endeavor to grasp something, to get something, to achieve something, to be something. In the Mahayana Buddhist teachings, they give a lot of talk about the universe appearing and disappearing in the moment. We're always sort of becoming, but we never really arrive. Do you ever arrive? Because you never stay. You're becoming. And then in your recall of it, you've done this and you've done that. And we believe that we're actually something that's real because of this. And this all comes out of the Buddhist teachings and understood through the understanding of impermanence and the functioning of this moment, how this moment arises and how it passes so quickly. Again, 64 flashes, we can't see it. But there is other softer and gentler ways of having to look at this transience and having to live in a way that the perceptions that are arising, we have some control of it. We have some ability to allow it to illuminate our life, allow it to enter into us in a way that makes us think in a new and a fresh way, almost instantly, rather than in a way of feeling we've arrived or got something or fixed a view. A fixed view is it's not only sticky, but it's what we then are no longer in that flow. We've somehow become stagnated and stuck and fixed here. And we all do it, every day we get on. I mean, recently I found when I was quite ill for many months, 6 months or so, I had certain fixed views about, what it is. I'm alone and I'm aging and, what should I be doing? And yes, maybe things are changing and not so many people are coming and, centering myself in all these ideas about who I am and what I am now. A common thing that happens when you start to become middle-aged or aging, even more so when you're living out in a forest. But every day I'd look out out the window, and this is through winter, since March right through to September. And when I went for walks or I went and planted something or went and trimmed something for a few moments every day, I would see how I am not that fixed idea that rattles around in my thoughts. I'm the person who's cutting something, who's putting a plant in the ground, who's observing what's freshly grown and what's blooming, what's dying. So these things started to, over quite a long period of time, started to change, even though you practice many years and I'm still meditating. I'm still observing my precepts and my practice and my, daily habits, a little different to the Mahayana the Theravada nuns and monks who, live in a temple and are very supported. I have to provide. But I started to see, and I mean, I've always known this, so it's not something I started to imagine, but in a real way, in a moment-to-moment way, life started to enter more deeply. Time became less of a thing, even less of any perceived moment, and more like a flow, more like what I experienced as in that dream as a child, of that embodiment in relationship to. Even though moments pass so quickly and our mind can't keep up with what is perceived as time, the nature, the clock, so to speak, of a day, it's always presenting the changes that deliver the message of this impermanence, of this change, of this movement, of this flow. I noticed when I was in Korea, and even in myself, there was, compared to my earlier years in studying Theravada, where we walked slowly and we did things in a very sort of almost formulaic way of mindfulness, that Korean Buddhism, and in a large monastic community, had developed, probably through its tradition, its culture, its history, a way of being very fast about everything. It took me a while to be able to step into that, to get that pace, to be present enough, to engage enough, because they're eating. They ate very fast. they walked fast, except at times when they were going in a line to some ceremony. But generally they walked quite swiftly. No one ran, but it was, very step by step. And yet, in this practice, there are always these sort of moments of what you'd call a lapse, or little moments of the mind stops and then you make a move to change. You're doing this, and then there's a decisive moment where you change that direction and you become very aware of it. It became part of the practice, this lag, this moments of separation. At first it was a little bit hard because I was still, if I was doing something that mindful way and that my practice had taught me in the early years of Buddhism, I wanted to do things. I wanted to continue in the way I was doing things. And I didn't have that capacity to suddenly, because the situation required that you do this now or you do that now. The bell gong goes and you have to stop what you're doing to go and do the next thing. The sticks clack and you have to stop meditating and jump up and walk around the room, There became this moment you had to change. And I actually started to find that a very interesting practice, that there was the capacity to change, quite intentionally change. This lag or this moment out of time offers that capacity of change. I'll just brush through some of this because it can go on. So in the transient stream of time, with moments appearing and disappearing, impermanence constantly cuts or the life, the moment, or whatever it is we've been living, it cuts and it changes. It separates from one moment to the other. And the pause can come very unexpectedly, as in life, Suddenly you're at a station and you've got to jump off that train at that time. You might be reading, dreaming, whatever, and somehow something instinctively knows you've got to move. But in being present long enough to find ourselves in the middle of that stream, in a relationship with that stream, is what is so important for our practice and our understanding of Dhamma. We can understand it so intellectually that you know exactly what the Buddha taught, exactly the meaning of that teaching. And you're very fluid in sharing that stream of knowledge as a thusness, an isness in the sense of it's a truth. It's like that, it's a truth. But it doesn't necessarily give you the opportunity to really tread in this moment of experiencing that. As you're listening to me, some of you are sort of thinking, what's she talking about? It's boring. It's not what I want to hear in a Dhamma talk. Because you're not actually in the moment of time of just being with it. You're drifting somewhere. You're wanting something different. You're tired. You're sleepy. Often we want to be entertained. We need jokes to keep us awake and alive. But treading in the core of time is a little like treading on the ocean floor. There's this really an interesting analogy where we're swimming on the surface of the ocean, but our feet is on the floor. The feet on the floor mean that you're actually grounded in the practice. Swimming in the ocean, we're just swimming with the influences that are coming and going for us. In our life, we have the arguments, we have the discussions, we have the good times with our friends and family. We go to work, we do our job, we have our interests, we have our hobbies, and it fills our life. And we're swimming. We're swimming in it. But it's very on the surface. As you start to meditate, then you're entering down into the roots of your practice. You're starting to, what we say is walk on the bottom of the ocean. It has another meaning to this. Every movement that we make on the surface, everything we are doing in our daily life is affecting what is going on in the movement of the ocean. Once, when I was a sculptor many years ago, I had to put in an assignment, and I did this assignment. It had to be just something that was linear, that something you drew and you had to explain it. And so I drew something on the edge of the ocean, and I said, what I do in this mark will affect something a long, long way away across that ocean. So in effect, what I'm saying, and even then, when I was in my early 20s, I had some intuition about this, that whatever actions I did, I was going to affect a vast array of situations that will arise, both in my life, in those around me, and further away. And the Buddha talks about that in our body and speech, the way we think. It has repercussions. It has ripples. It has effects far beyond what we can imagine. And so this is about this. In treading on the core of time is like treading on the ocean floor while swimming in waves. We can enter the whole world in a moment and understand time in a deep relationship with all beings. At the intersection of time and space, you can experience a complete freedom of being, or at least a complete freedom of personhood, of who we think we are. This state of existence is completely beyond an idea of time and space, or even being. It is a deep experience of time. Understanding how time influences human life so that we know how to live in the best possible way is very important. In Mahayana Buddhism teaching, everything exists in a simultaneous moment together. Everything arises in this moment and it passes away simultaneously. When you're dreaming about many beings coming together, it can happen in a moment. We can dream about a crowd of people coming to be with us, or we're part of some big event. It just happens in a moment. When we wake up, it's gone. The crowd's gone. The party's gone. The people have gone. So what is happening here? It's similar to when I would come out of the sea and leave the sea creatures. And the next time I would go, I had grown, they had changed. My subconscious mind was continuing to develop that illusion, that dream. But for me, it was real. It was another reality. No one had ever said it's not a part of who you are. So it became a sort of, I never really judged it. I just had those dreams. And I think we live in those dreams much of our life. Not just in the subconscious, but in those dreams. And when I went back to shore, they all disappeared. But they didn't go away. That's an interesting thing. So then there's an interesting thing about the past. Does the past in time actually go away? It's always influencing who and what we are doing now. In a sutra it says, in order for life to change, there must be another moment. So there has to be a moment where things come into the existence, where we come to this moment. And we know that it's so fast as we're always in the coming of a moment, becoming of a moment. But it says here, for something to change, there has to be a change in the direction of our perception of that moment. And when it changes, the new sort of flux of arisings and passing also changes. The new becomings. But actually, the question is, do they end? That is the question. That is the inquiry. That is something to look into. When do they end? When does a relationship end? When does a life end? Does a life end because the body starts to decay? No, we're always relating. We're always dying, so to speak. We're always becoming. But the question too is, do we ever become? Do we ever really land? Now I must say, this is from a Mahayana Zen perspective, so I'll leave the great Theravadan teachings to those who speak that well. When beings are interconnected in a sort of space of a timeless space, the next moment can begin because the source of time of being and the source of being is time. They are not separate. They can only begin in that interconnective way. So then, going back to Dogen's whole teaching on this time being, he put it, time being. We have another connotation for time being. We use it sometimes in our language for the time being, at this time, for the time being. But this is talking on a much deeper level. And some of it, it takes a while to really digest. We cannot see real time unless it is manifested in our daily life. Now this is the factor related to mindfulness and to how we act, how we live out the Buddhist teachings, what we do with our life, who we choose to interact with, and also what are our dreams and aspirations, how does that fit into it? Because in that moment, those dreams and aspirations are very real. In that sort of collection of moments, we are growing them, we're creating them, we're manifesting them. So the intersection of time and space is right here. They're not separate. Time and space and any sense of being within time is interconnected with time. This state of existence is completely beyond any idea of time and space. We cannot see the real time unless it manifests, as I said, in daily life. And because time is connected to also function and the process of what we do, how we do things. For a person who is maybe a carpenter, who has a very smooth, quiet way of working to shape the wood, then time will be reflected slowly in what he is producing. He doesn't make it quickly. It evolves slowly. As a sculptor, it evolves slowly. As a painter, it evolves slowly in little processes that link one action to the next. Sometimes you can actually even see, and I notice this and I recall this as a sculptor, you do something and you stop and you look at it. And then you do something, you hit a bit of stone and then you stop and you look. And you hit a bit more and you stop and you look. You know, you're shaping the form as you're reflecting in little increments. I saw in my own teacher how there was a seamlessness about his life, which was something that created a lot of peace around him. That whether this person entered the space, or he was suddenly called out to do something, or whether he had to get up off the cushion and go and work with a monastic, usually worked in the gardens once a week and other days for an hour or two, his mind never changed. It was very smooth. It wasn't always, jolly joy. He could laugh, roar with laughter, but it still was tremendously right there. And so when you went into the presence of that, there's this spaciousness, this sense of fullness within yourself. You experience that mind of such a person when you meet them. It may be a quality of deep compassion, and you feel deep joy within yourself. It may be a quality of wisdom, and suddenly your mind lights up and you feel bright and fresh. It may be other qualities of generosity, and suddenly you feel like giving something. These come in relation with others. Every one of us here in this room have extraordinary, great qualities, but we haven't recognized them. We haven't yet lived them. We haven't believed in them. We may not even know them because the confusion's so great within us, or the grief is so great, or the loss is so great, or the sadness, whatever it is. But when we do start to recognize we have so much and so much to give, then we start to become free, because the separate egoic self is no longer grasping for me. It's in a capacity to always give, always be. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, it is said that whilst, I mentioned that before, in the Tang dynasty, this master Zhuangzi wrote this poem called The Boatman. A line of 1,000 feet goes straight down, the slightest motion of a single wave, and 10,000 waves follow. The evening is still, the water is cold, the fish aren't feeding. I come home with an empty boat, loaded with the moonlight. That was also in Rökyuan's poem. He talks about a thief coming and taking everything he had, which was very little. And when he was about to lay down, because all that was left was his mattress and his pillow, and when he was laying his head down on his pillow and the moonlight came over his head, through the window over his head, he said, "Oh, what a shame. He's taken everything." I think he even took all his clothes. He came there and he met the thief taking everything, so he let him, and he took all his clothes off and gave them to the thief. And he's lying on the pillow and he said, "Oh, what a shame. I couldn't have given him this moonlight. I couldn't have given him a luminous mind, or illuminated his mind, because he was so after things, whatever. He was so poor, so impoverished." But again, that loading the boat with the moon, or loading the empty vessel with the mind, with the luminous mind. So again, back to our sense impressions, with the hopes and the fears, through our imagination and dreams. As I've said, we're constantly planning But beneath the dream of our everyday life, we are all rooted, we're all connected as that foot on the bottom of the ocean, in reality, in truth, in the capacity to be Buddha. If we weren't rooted there, then there's no capacity for awakening. In Korea, there was a practice of hwadu, what we call hwadu, which is an inquiry. And my hwadu was, what is this? And what is this is something that is like that line or that foot that anchors you in the ground. It's a practice. You may have a practice of watching your breath. You may have a practice of visualization. Whatever that practice is, it grounds you. It is the line that goes into the ocean to catch something, to get something, to achieve and attain something. So you have to have that line. You have to have that grounding in the Dhamma for it to ripen in your practice and in your heart, to awaken and illuminate you. I had a little hermitage in Song Kwang Sa, where I lived for 15 years up in the mountain. And I studied, sutras like the Avatamsaka, where some of this teaching is very profoundly written, but it's actually probably a little bit out of our depth here today. But the name of the temple was called the Ocean, and it came out of a sutra called the Ocean Samadhi Sutra, which is about entering into the ocean of mind, entering into a deep samadhi. And it was called Inwalam. And Inwal means the seal of the moon. So the reflection on the moon, on the ocean. I heard in a talk recently, they were talking about reflections of the moon in puddles. It's not about the moon in this way. The moon doesn't become the water. The water doesn't become the luminosity. It's a reflection. It's something that sits and illuminates. So the mind doesn't necessarily become all these elements other than in the moment of reflection, experience, the moment of interconnection, reflection. But the moon is always means an awakened mind. The full moon in Mahayana Buddhism, in Zen Buddhism, means the awakened mind. So how does that luminous state of our mind, how does it work in the world? It is spring now, and in my garden there is this coming into bloom, and very shortly it passes away, and something else. There's a sort of a season where colours come, where different flowers. So we're starting to see a few little chrysanthemum coming out, or lilies coming out, as other little plants their blossoms have faded. But it does remind me when I go for a walk. It gives me joy because I see all the stages of it becoming and it passing. And there is that moment where it is fully alive, fully present, right there. And for me in that moment, there isn't a separation. There isn't a me observing or the flower trying to pretentiously appear and show itself off to me. Is a connection on a far deeper level. That flower is me in that moment. It's me when it's just shooting out of the ground as a plant, a few green leaves. It's me as it starts to grow a stem. It's me as it starts to produce a bud and flower. And it's me as it starts to fade. And there's nowhere necessary to go or to avoid it or to grasp it and hold on to it. There's always something coming into this fruition and something passing. That also, in that moment, is the only me moment there is, because it's not in separation. It's in full interrelation. And that's where love is. That's where appreciation is. That's where generosity arises from. That's where contentment and the capacity to feel good about yourself, you know. And that's very important. So I'll leave it here. My time's up. I tend to babble on and get to the point at some point. But thank you for listening. And I could see generally a quite a awake audience. Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So if there's any questions, we might have time for just a few.
Yeah. Beautiful talk today. And I'd like to swap between the in-room and the online audience for questions, maybe beginning in-room. I see a hand up at the back, which we perhaps... Oh.
Thank you very much for a very insightful talk. I just want to say that this is very profound because it brought back my memory of reading the philosopher John Paul Sartre, because he said that we are the arrow of time, that we are never in the past and never in the future, because like you said, we are not arrived, we are always becoming. So what your talk really, captured the essence of when he said that we are the arrow of time and always becoming, each moment. So thank you very much. I just felt that I could relate to it very much.
Yeah, thank you. There's also, this is really just a very surface touch or introduction. There's actually many other layers to time that I really felt be too much, maybe more confusing. So I tried to keep it to a few points. But I think to go into more of that immersion of into being, you might say, is a word that Thich Nhat Hanh, but that interrelational side, like the experience as a child going into water, didn't really see the fish as something other than family, didn't have that expression in mind. So those sort of layers are actually quite well described. I might touch on it in another talk from another perspective. But as you practice, those of you here who've practiced a long time will know what I'm talking about. And but that's a very important thank you. I didn't know of that, that he was involved in that, but many philosophers have studied time. Buddhists aren't the only ones. Yes.
Thank you, Venerable. There is a question from DEC's Papas online. Venerable Chi Kwang Sunim, many people struggle with wanting things they may not achieve in their current life. What wisdom would you offer someone facing unfulfilled desires?
Oh, yes, unfulfilled. Well, I think we live in unfulfilled desires. If we go on the talk that I've just given, it's a reality of where our thinking is actually very projected into a future dream, into a future idea of how we should and what we want to have in our life. And I think a lot of people do get to a place where they sort of have everything they think they want, and it still hasn't brought them contentment or fulfillment or joy, because it hasn't related, it hasn't been, in a sense, in connection to the broader community that they live in, or in relation to, you know, us as a human being. That's something we didn't touch on in the talk, you know, our connection as human beings and how that arises and how we affect the change in humanity, or the change in how we do things that reflect in other actions with others. So the more we project into the I wanting, then the more unhappiness we find out, or the more difficulties and unfulfilled. He mentions being unfulfilled. So thank you. It is to bring some of what I talked about today back into your life, in your practice, and see what arises, because you might find a lot more fulfillment in not trying to overly achieve or want things that are out of your capacity to get.
There's a question here, perhaps. Thank you.
You mentioned that when you look at the flower, you did not see the separation between you and the flower. The same. Yes, because at that moment you don't think as a separate self.
That's right.
But if you recognize the flower with your memory, it's a rose, you are known that it's a rose, it's your name, immediately you create duality.
That's right, yeah.
Then you exist at that moment. So you are not,
that's right.
then you are separated from the flower.
Yes.
So this thought, the thinking is the one that you lose when you move from one moment to the other. So we are in the moment, you are all interconnected, you are nothing, and therefore you are everything. As you said earlier, you are everything. You are connected, whole universe, when you are in the moment, because there is no self. When you go to the next moment with your memory, then it is wrong, because that's what the time does.
That's
but
right.
if you go to the next moment, it's a new moment, again, you are nothing.
Yes, right.
So that's why moment to moment, you are nothing.
I'm not so, I don't use nothing quite in that way, but no thingness, maybe. You're a no thing in that moment. Yes. Nothing can have an annihilation, like nothing, an emptiness, not in the wrong context, can have an annihilating view. Yeah. I totally agree. I didn't go into too much into the thought processes here, because that's real. You know, once you start thinking about it and judging it and talking to yourself about its beauty, all of this, rather than being in its presence, the alleviation or the letting go of the mental stream of emotion and view and judgments, I mean, they happen. As I said, when I was sick and weak, you know, I started to reflect on, oh gosh, you know, I've got this big property and I've done so much, but I don't think I can keep it. You know, you start to go down a track of all these what ifs. But then I was able to actually, on most days, you know, to sit and let that go and just walk into the nature. And it was the teacher, you know, because we're teaching comes from every source, of course, you know. And so when you're in the presence of a teacher, your mind sort of shuts up. All you want's sort of shut up, and you can, you know, stop and listen and stop and looking. Yes, but thank you. That's very true. It's very, very true. Yeah.
I think the correct word is not nothing. I think it's emptiness, isn't it? Nothing is the wrong word, I think.
It's very hard work, you know, shunyata or emptiness. Also, they sort of miss, sometimes in the original language of Pali and Sanskrit, they have a better interpretation. But I mean, in a way, when you really have an experience of so-called emptiness, you know, where the non-dual sort of happens, or where you experience that wholeness and completeness and interrelational experience, it is an emptying of the egoistic ideas and self, you know. The thought process becomes very still. And I think in great masters that is very apparent. They're not sitting there with their eyes twitching and they're thinking about this and that. They're just there with you, you know. Which is, I mean, I've been very fortunate to meet teachers, you know. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Jia and Venerable. There's also a note of appreciation from Odysseus, whose question you responded to.
Yes.
Richard online has a question about dreams, and you mentioned your dreams.
A dream, yes.
Yes. So the question is what your opinion is on dreams and whether we should not overestimate them, because people have good dreams and bad dreams and neutral dreams, and while interpreting some of them may have helped him and others very much in their lives, he's worried whether one should be cautious about
look,
dreams.
this is just talking about a situation related to what I was talking about. I wasn't giving a talk about dreams. I was talking about the that feeling of what I experienced in that dream as a child, you know. There are people who do a lot of dream yoga. There are Tibetan Buddhist teachers and other teachers who teach, psychologists teach about dream therapy and find it very useful and heal a lot of people through this medium. I don't put a lot of emphasis, you know. I don't usually remember my dreams unless it's something very profound, and then I do listen to it and I do reflect on it. But you know, that's very much up to an individual, whether they want to use it for a practice, whether they need to use it for healing. Then they go to the specialist, the dream specialist, who can work with them on that. It's not something I was actually talking about in regard to making dream as a practice, yeah. Sometimes what happens is sometimes when people listen to a talk, I've found they hear something really early on, and they get stuck in that. It takes them somewhere where they go off in this whole stream of reflecting about that word, that line, that concept, and they miss the whole talk. They miss the whole talk. And all they've done is perpetuate that habit we have of reassuring and referring what it is we think we know. We hear something in the Dhamma from someone. I listened to some really profound teachings in this last week, Theravada and other traditions, and I heard wonderful things, you know, things that really made me think, but I didn't get stuck on them. I listened them to the end. In that moment, reflect on that maybe. If it's necessary to reflect on it, you will come back and reflect on it. But can I suggest you do, in a Dhamma talk, listen to the whole Dhamma talk. Sometimes the point doesn't come to the last word, and that's very common with me. I used to do that a lot, and people say, well, you'd come around to it eventually, you know. We'd get the story. Yeah. So I think we're at the end, are we?
Thank you, Venerable, for the clarification. I think Sri Jude,
yeah.
do you want to have questions?
One more.
No, I think we're right.
Well, I will ask a question since we do have. Yes, it is. You mentioned, and this probably goes back to your point about listening to the whole Dhamma talk. That you posed a question: Do we ever really arrive? And
that's a good thing to reflect on and think. You know.
So that had me spinning. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, so that's where you got stuck.
Yeah.
So that's actually not bad, because what that would do, that's like a whadu. That's like a whadu. A whadu is not just a koan with with a whole storyline and you have a point to the storyline that takes you into the reflection, the point that takes you to the reflection is hwadu. It's something that sort of stumps the mind, stumps your thinking. And in the back of your mind, you keep thinking about it, you know, or you try to see where it is in your life, what's happening in your life. So it's actually a good thing. But if you know, we might think, I've arrived at my car and I've arrived at opening the door and I'm getting in my car. But there are many, many moments of, the compounded sort of situations of actions, tiny, tiny little actions. And to say they're disconnected is not right. To say this one's isolated on its own. Although I know Dogen says he talks about like increments in time, but they're not separate. They're one that's leading to another. It's a bit like rust, a car rusting. It's not suddenly all rusted. It's a little bit of corrosion that adds more corrosion. But he says it in another way that's really interesting. He says it's like there's these little moments of something that is driving us and that's been doing it our whole life. There's some core things that we have learned at a very young age that really have a big influence moment after moment after moment on how we think and what we do. And I think I haven't got the actual words he puts with it, but he said it's rather than a separate path to this moment of becoming, and rather than the moment becoming completely separate to the future, the future is part of our psychology, our thinking, our dream. Our like the man who wants more. That's part of what we are, part of who we are. But there is something leading to that. And then there's something, as I talked about in the gap, that stops it and changes, maybe a sound. And that's how many of the little haiku poems, something happens and then that. Then there was a sound of a bird or the sound of wood being chopped or something, that awakens. So we're going along, but if we're really there in that moment to moment going along, mindfully with what the trajectory is, or in that moment, it's like cycling, we're all in a group cycling and, one turns or one stops and then everyone starts to look at what's happened. The trajectory changes. Yeah. So have a think about it. That's good.
Thank you, Chi Kwang.
Yeah. Oh, no, don't have a think about it. Just let it. Let it ripen in its time.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you,
thank
Chi
you.
Kwang, for offering the Dhamma talk today. And you were saying to me this morning that, she was saying this morning that it almost didn't happen. She was coming down from Kinglake and there was a tree that had fallen and she took a half an hour detour to make it here. So we were very, very appreciative.
I'll add a couple of things to that. I'm coming down the mountain. I saw two signs and I just thought, roadwork. First one was roadworks. And I ignored it. I saw another one, assumed it said roadworks. It was actually saying detour. I saw the third one, which also said, you've got to go back. Detour's back that way. I didn't see that all because they're all yellow, I just saw it. The first one said roadworks, yellow. Second one said detour, yellow. Because I was coming to the BSV, coming down the mountain. So there's a perfect example of, where something may go amiss. So then I got down to where the tree had fallen and there's all people cutting. And I'm sitting there thinking, I've got to go all the way back. I'm never going to get here in time. I'd have to go back the long way. I'd be here by 11, So that's how the trajectory can change because we're not in the moment with what's arising and seeing it in that view. Having that view, it was like that view. with an intent. So you can practice a long time and still be like everyone else. Thank you very much.